Welcome to Writers Blockbusters, the show where we treat the final edit of the movie like the script. I'm one of your hosts, Bob Rose, and with me today is somebody that's going to introduce themselves, such as Jimmy George.
I am Jimmy George. I am a screenwriter and script consultant. And if we're still doing this, my Twitter handle is @JimmyRGeorge.
Okay, and Jamie.
And I'm Jamie Nash. I am a screenwriter. I'm also the writer of two Save the Cat books. Save the Cat Writes for TV and the Save the Cat Beat Sheet Workbook. My Twitter handle is Jamie_Nash because I refuse to move over to the new social medias of any kind.
I guess my Twitter handle is @ThunderGruntBob. I forgot to say it. I'm slowly phasing it out of my brain.
Yes.
I'm still there, but whatever. Anyway, today we're going to talk about, from what we gather and what we theorize, is our first Netflix movie ever. Like Netflix
streaming movie, period.
Oh, it is our first streaming movie?
At all, yeah.
Like the first originally made for streaming movie.
For streaming, as opposed to like the pandemic acquired for streaming.
Yeah.
We're dumping them on streaming because nobody goes to the movie theaters anymore.
We're basically abandoning the box office in our show that's about box office.
Yeah, you gotta to enjoy our show from now on, just ignore the title. We're not changing it. We just ignore it. It doesn't matter anymore. Nothing matters. No. Yeah, this is our first streaming movie, our first Netflix movie, but it's a cheat. I feel like that's a cheat since it's David Fincher.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't feel like a Netflix movie, but whatever. Before we get into our talking points,
wait, this just in. This movie made $98.2 million at the box office.
Wait, how?
Wait, what?
This just it's Killers with Ashton Kutcher.
Oh God!
I'm sorry.
Jesus.
Sorry.
Which has a very famous, interesting backstory of its own.
Yeah,
I never saw it, and now I'm happy to never have seen it. Right?
Yeah, Bob DeRosa, a good friend of mine, wrote it. He's a good guy. Good guy.
Before we get into our talking points, we're gonna go around and just say our little like hot take on The Killer. For each of us.
This just in.
Jesus.
The Killer made $362,000 at the box office.
That sounds right though. Like for the screenings,
which, if you believe the media these days, it beat Marvel's or something. From the zeitgeist, that's what I hear.
362,000 beat the Marvels. Okay, it didn't do that.
No, I'm kidding. It's a joke. It's an exaggeration.
All right.
It'll beat the Marvels, in a few weeks, maybe.
But Netflix doesn't release numbers or anything, so how will we know?
I just mean this number will beat whatever they are. 50 or something.
Before we get into it, it is true. Like that, the reason that we're noting that it's streaming is it does kill that part of the fun of talking about this. There's
Jamie
nothing to say.
Go down his list.
Jamie can't go down the list. There's nothing to say. Like, did it do good? It's on the front page of the Netflix menu.
It's
for a week.
Right. Exactly.
Yay.
It'll be there forever, but you'll never find it if you're not looking for it.
Right. Yeah. So like you don't really know. It's just it exists now. Okay. All right,
it's like a fucking long YouTube video now.
It's a long TikTok video. Get it right.
We should look at the other blockbusters that came straight to streaming, like Pain Hustlers or something.
Oh yeah.
No, I don't know.
That is a thing, right?
That's the last one I remember. That was the one with Emily Blunt and Captain America or something like that.
Okay.
Old Dads with Bill Burr.
I watched Old Dads.
Yeah. These are straight to streaming blockbusters.
Right. Every Adam Sandler movie in the last 10 years.
Every Adam Sandler movie.
All right.
Murder
Let's
Mystery
go around.
Part 7.
Wait, I think they're only at 2. Let's go around and say what we thought, just our own personal hot take without script. You can talk about things other than the script. So who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Go for it.
So this is a movie that, as maybe if you listen to the show a lot, you've heard me go on a tangent of how 43-year-old me doesn't gravitate toward gun violence movies or just movies that are about killers. It's not a thing that I'm a horror movie writer, but just like people who like kill for a living and organized crime, those things are not really my favorite.
Killers as the heroes in some ways.
Yes, that's what
POV
I'm
from
saying.
the killer.
Yes. So it's not a movie that I would have probably watched at all if it weren't for this show. And I didn't really even know about it until we were deciding what were we going to do. And it was one of the new releases that we could actually watch. So, yeah, I have very little like expectations going in, and I liked it. I didn't love it, but I appreciate the craft of what it's doing. And I'm gonna reference a lot. There's an interview out there on another podcast called A Script Apart. It's a Red Ampersand funded podcast. So if you know who Red Ampersand is, it's sort of like they own like half of the screenwriting businesses out there. And it's Andrew Kevin Walker talking about the writing of this movie for like 2 hours, and it gave a lot of interesting insight into what we're going to talk about. And I'm going to pull some quotes from him, not just from him, but quotes he said about David Fincher's aspect of the writing. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say.
Okay. Jamie?
Yeah, I knew this was coming out. I was looking forward to it. I didn't really know what it was about. I didn't pay any attention, didn't watch the trailer. It looked kind of, in fact, almost what's the word? I don't want to say bland. That's the wrong word, but almost like vanilla. And so the killer, hitman, something goes wrong. I mean, I don't know. It felt like we've seen this movie a lot, but it was Fincher, so I knew it would be something different, or at least kind of spectacular in its own weird way. So then I turned it on and I started to watch it, and I was like, this looks too artsy fartsy for me. I thought it was just going to be the voiceover through the whole thing. I thought they were going to run with the gimmick where nobody was really going to say anything, and it was just going to be him talking. And I was like, I got to turn this off and watch it when I'm paying more attention, because I think it was writing or something, while I was watching. I was too screening, and I was like, I got to pay more attention. So then I did, and I actually really liked it. I was like, I totally bought in. I liked the things they were saying. I liked the simplicity of it. I thought it was easy to follow. Lots of non-screenplay things dragging me in. The Smiths, using that as the motif. Hal was kind of going back and forth between his POV where the music was loud and then to the things, and how high-tech everything was, or modern everything was. There's just so many different things visually that I was kind of tracking with that I really dug. Just the look of the movie and stuff like that, and in the execution of the movie. One thing I mentioned to you guys, about 10 minutes in, I started to get deja vu. Like I had written a script a long time ago that was kind of about like the killer next door kind of thing, like some ordinary dude next door, kind of a comedy version of this. And it started out with some guy staring out a window at his target, waiting for the target to show up for days and days and days. And then I had the second thought that I think I ripped that off from a comic book. And then I realized this was based on a comic book. Not that movie ever came out or anything. It was something I was going to shoot myself. I think it was even a short that I was going to shoot. But it was, but anyway, then I realized, I read this comic. I read this graphic novel years ago, many, many years ago. I still have it. It's for sale if you want to buy it. It's a graphic novel. I have lots of comics for sale.
This show is a front for Jamie selling his old comic collection
in your garage.
Yeah,
it would be hard for me to find this one, because while I've picked out like my Ninja Turtles and my Secret Wars and my Star Wars comics and my G.I. Joe originals, the killer was in the new wave of comic books, and they just kind of got tossed in a box somewhere.
It's in a different long box.
Yeah,
different long box. I think I didn't have. I had the collected graphic novel too. I didn't have like the individual issues or anything like that. So anyway, I really liked it. I enjoyed it. It's a movie that I think I appreciate more because it's just so well executed. I think the scenes are executed well. I think the technical side is Fincher-esque, and I think it's kind of short and sweet and simple. I think it moves fast. It was an easy like Saturday night watch when I watched it. So that's my killer review.
Yeah, I actually don't want to say too much because I feel like so much of what we got to talk about is going to
Okay.
cover that. But I also I feel very similar to Jamie. It's like I really love the movie, but I think especially out of all three of us, I like really love movies. For execution, sometimes maybe more than the script. And
Mhm.
this is one of those things where it's like the execution is so awesome. Like it's visually, it's just like beautiful. I appreciated the sound design so much. Acting is on point. You know what I mean? It's a movie I could sit in for a while and rewatch a few times.
Yep.
But the reason that it's interesting to do on the show is because it's so simple. Like when Jamie recommended it, I was like, man, I was like talking about this is gonna be weird. But outside of that discussion, I really enjoyed it, and I probably will
Mhm.
revisit it in the future until
Yep.
Netflix angers me enough that I cancel my subscription.
Yeah.
and then, bye forever.
Not
Unless they do
only
physical media.
it's a weird movie in that not only is it simple, it
Yeah.
doesn't really have any huge twists or turns. There's not
No.
like, oh my god, his girlfriend's in on it, or it's just straightforward, almost predictable in some
If I
ways.
had to insult it, and this is not an insult, this is a movie that I would imagine would be terrible if anyone else made it. And also, it's like the conceit of something I would expect from a film school student.
Mhm.
Not to
Interesting.
not to insult the original source
That's
material, but
that's
like
what's
It's funny
that's
because
why I started checking out on it at first. I was
right,
like, oh
right.
no,
Oh no, it's gonna be this.
this
Right.
is that movie. Yeah.
There's a lot of red flags in this
Mhm.
movie
Mhm.
until Fincher, makes you go, oh right. I forgot whose hands I was in. Sorry, Jamie.
Bob, you said that very thing about Memento, and I think this is very Memento-esque. This
Right,
story.
but this isn't as
Even
up.
his monologue.
Yes.
This isn't as up its own ass as Milan.
I think this one has this does have a sense of humor. It's kind of funny.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
it
does. No, it
does.
totally.
And that's not on the talking points. There's a lot of
No.
humor
There's a
in
lot
it.
of funny stuff in it. I
I
mean, the
think that's
beginning
what
is
keeps me
funny.
going. Mhm.
Yeah,
Like
totally.
all that serious like inner monologue, and then when he fucks up, he goes, "Oh shit!" That made me
He
act.
says
laugh.
fuck. He's
Yeah,
like
it's like
fuck.
fuck, right.
Yeah,
It's like all this serious stuff. Yeah,
there's an
fuck.
article out there, I think it's Slash Film,
Mhm.
did it, that's arguing the same way that we talked about Joker, that uh, it's actually a comedy and it's supposed to be a comedy.
Now,
Um,
is that the one also that says it's kind of like it's like David Fincher almost commenting on his career?
yes,
Like I've seen that.
like
I
making fun of himself
Right,
for
I
being a control freak.
I
right.
mean, I was having a hard time trying to think that it wasn't about writing because it starts off, you have to be used to boredom or whatever he
Yeah,
says. You
I
have
mean,
to do nothing and be used to
it
boredom to like this to
it
be
exists on that
successful.
level too,
Yeah.
right? It's
I was
about
like,
him as a
if it
creator.
if it
I was
is
like, is
about
this
him too,
Sting?
it's one of his few movies with a happy ending.
Mhm.
So he gave himself a happy ending. Maybe the opening scene is him making Alien 3.
But
It's
we're gonna go into this later. But but basically, Andrew Kevin Walker said in the few things he did concretely say is that he's an unreliable narrator to himself, even in the end.
Gotcha.
So
yeah,
that's
I could see that.
interesting. He's sitting on the beach saying that he's one of the many, but can that be trusted?
Right.
Right.
Like, yeah,
And there's that I sent you guys videos you probably didn't watch, but Fincher kind of confirms that and says like his interest in making the movie was we lie to ourselves in our own heads. So I thought it would be funny to make a movie about a guy who lies to himself
Mhm.
with voiceover.
yeah,
So he's
great,
confirming that it's not reliable. It's
yeah.
right. Okay, well we kind of covered it, but Jamie, who wrote this shit?
This is written by Andrew Kevin Walker, and he wrote Seven, among other things. Among
Brain
funny
scan,
movies.
man.
Brain
Brain
Scan.
Scan, Tales from the Crypt, 8mm.
Now, here's a weird
Which
thing
he
about
said he's never seen.
really. He's never seen 8mm. I know they changed it a lot from his spec or something.
That's
Um,
that was why he said he's
I
like my name is on it, but
the
I've heard that it's nothing like what I wrote.
the,
Oh,
the
okay.
fun the funny thing is I started screenwriting really in earnest or studying it probably around 98. So Seven loomed large back then. It was and he as a writer loomed large. He probably was like even more so than like Shane Black and stuff that were probably like a few years before that. In 98, this is the guy everybody wanted to be. You wanted to be him. And he launched with Seven. So he seemed like this kind of smart, cerebral kind of screenwriter who could do dark stuff and things like that. But he followed it up with things that were dark adjacent, sort of like Sleepy Hollow, and the fact that he could do this kind of blockbuster kind of dark movie about a killer, I guess, in some ways. It kind of showed, I don't know, to me, it showed me like the path you should take. Like yes, you might start out with Seven, but you should always look for like, what's the one that's like a 4-quadrant movie that has its foot in the Seven, or something like that. Like you were constantly trying to find things that were still within your sort of Venn diagram, but were also within their Venn diagram. And I remember he was kind of the first person that I looked at and I said, oh, that's how you have a screenwriting career. That's what it looks like. It's this weird thing where you keep kind of leveling up and you don't repeat yourself over and over and over again. You kind of do slightly different things that interest you. But anyway, part of his filmography, like you guys said, I mean, he kind of started out hot and then he got a little, I don't want to say
it's weird.
It's weird because he started out
Yeah.
super hot. Like I said, when I was around in 98, he was the thing. 8mm came out, super cool movie, kind of among my group of people. It's like dark and kind of
Not
weird.
like this.
It's
Not
infinitely
like this.
rewatchable. to me.
Infinitely rewatchable.
It really is.
So even though it wasn't a huge box office thing, it was popular in
the Nick Cage Renaissance. I think people appreciate it more.
But then he goes to like Sleepy Hollow, which was huge. It was a big blockbuster. And then it gets a little weird. He does a bunch of shorts. I remember, weren't they for like a car commercial or something? I don't know.
The Hire looks familiar to me. Who's in that?
I can't remember. But then he did the Wolfman. I remember he wrote on the Wolfman. Batman vs Superman was in there, and the Wolfman wasn't until 2010. So between Hideaway and the Wolfman, that's 10 years.
Yeah, and he talked a lot about how many projects he wrote that never saw the light.
Saw it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like Sleepy Hollow came, and then he kind of fell away a little bit.
Have you guys seen Hideaway? It is nuts.
I haven't seen it in a long time since
it's
the 90s. It's
incredibly entertaining, but it is nuts.
Jeff Goldblum, Alicia
Silverstone. It is nuts. Yeah. It's fun. It's really not. It's not a boring movie.
It's a Dinar Kuntz book. That's why I know it. I grew up a huge Dinar Kuntz fan. Like that was my thing.
So Hideaway is?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And I read the book as a kid. I've never seen the movie.
It's also like got some really early CGI that makes it super fun. like they were not ready to do the things they were trying to do.
Dinar Kuntz is a weird guy. He never really got his place in the sun, in my opinion, because he was always like a Stephen King knockoff sort of, but he is very different. And he wrote so many books. He's got like Phantoms and Hideaway and Servants of the Twilight, and he's kind of lesser C movies. But I read all those books and I thought those books were amazing. But the movies never really translated. But anyway, that's our guy.
And he wrote a Metalocalypse movie, so that's
yes, he did.
I mean, and then he wrote a David Fincher movie. That's like that's weird. That's great. Okay, so to start out, you guys want to talk about The Broken Compass?
Sure. So Broken Compass is an idea that I put in my book, Save the Cat Writes for TV. And my idea of a broken compass, it's something I do. I write little psychological codes for my characters. Okay. Some mantras, I basically call them. So I will come up with a character's flaw. Like, let's say somebody is, I don't know, selfish or something like that. And then I will come up with the origin for that flaw, which is called the shard of glass. And then I'll write a little, I will never code or mantra that people follow. And it's really trying to flesh out what selfish means to them. Like, what does that really mean to them? Like, it's easy to say somebody's selfish, but what does that mean? So it might be 5 to 10 statements. So watching this movie and hearing the guys, every thought, I mean, essentially what he's saying there, trust no one, only Only fight the battle you're paid to fight. Have no empathy. All that stuff.
Stick to the plan.
Stick to the plan. Anticipate. Do not improvise. That is very similar to what my broken compass would look like. Very similar. And the only reason it's a little odd is because I don't know that this character arcs really. I think he still lies to himself by the end. Like, even though I think he still kind of believes in his broken compass by the end. But the advantage of a typical broken compass, and this movie totally does that, is you write this out in advance. So, you come up with your character, you give them this little psychological thing that maybe they don't even know it themselves, but this is how they act. It's what makes them tick. And then what I like to do is I like to make scenes that test that as hard as you can. And one thing I learned from this movie, I think, because I think in this movie, he kind of breaks, like, I bet you could go back and find that he breaks every one of the rules, but keeps believing he follows those rules. He
lies to himself.
He lies to himself. And I think in most movies, when you do a character arc, first you test those rules and you show us them not breaking those rules and how painful that is. So you do that first. But then I think what this movie taught me a little bit is, if you want to watch your character arc and you do this broken compass thing, maybe what you do is you show them learning that each of those rules is wrong. And then by the end, you have a character arc. You know what I mean?
At least from the audience's perspective of
That's
watching
right.
them experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is for your own math.
It
they're not.
Feels like it. It's not
Yeah,
happening.
you feel it.
Feel
You
like
feel
it.
it.
Yeah. This, by the way, and this is for your own math. Like, this movie says them because we hear the guy's every thought. But in your movie, it'll be subtext. In your story, it'll be subtext. And if you can show that, if you can communicate what these things are without having them say it, like trust no one. If you can show them trusting no one and show that that's a problem. But then you show that how painful that is, and then ultimately show them learning to trust people and how that is positive. And you can do that for each of the ones. I think at the end, you'll have like a more healthy character that's arced.
Yeah, I put it on here because when I was watching this movie, I was like, holy shit, we are literally hearing this guy's broken compass. That's Jamie's tech that I learned from you, from your technique. We're literally hearing his personal code repeated over and over again. And then when I listened to that interview with Andrew Kevin Walker, he said, like, the first thing that Fincher pitched to me was this mantra was going to be the bedrock of the story, and we were going to watch it sort of fall apart as he's experiencing one thing after another that makes him violate this mantra. Like, that was the whole story was pitched based on the mantra, and how do we pull that apart? So it's a great example of that, Jamie, of your technique.
It's essentially a revenge movie, right? Like, that it is a revenge movie, and I would say the last thing of his mantra is fight only the battle you're paid to fight.
Right.
He's doing something he wasn't even hired to do for the majority of the movie.
The whole movie.
Out of passionate anger, really. Mm-hmm. So it's literally breaking as he's
empathy for somebody else.
Right, but as he's chanting this, he's literally on a quest to do something that isn't that.
So we know it's flawed, right?
Yeah, right from the get-go.
Yeah. Yeah, right. And I hear people sometimes say, like, when they come up with a flaw for the character, like, what is the lie they're telling themselves? Mm-hmm. And in this character, he has like several lies he's kind of telling himself. He's like, I'm this cold-hearted killer kind of thing.
But he actually cares.
Yeah, he really does. That's just, he's pretending to be this thing because that's how he gets through life and that's how he's able to do it. But somewhere deep down, that's not true at all. He's telling himself some kind of lie.
Yeah, Danny Manis, who's a fellow consultant, he has an exercise called Deal Breakers, and he challenges up front when you're figuring out your character to, like, write a list of deal breakers. I will do anything except for this and this and this. And then you make them have to have a dilemma about these deal breakers and show how, like you said, Jamie, how painful it is to break that deal you have with yourself, and that shows how the characters change.
It sounds like almost the same thing.
Yeah.
The deal breakers. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Cool. you want to talk about the payback vengeance clock?
Yes, I put this on here because once again, it's something that we talk a lot in this podcast about deadlines and about urgency and how the standard Hollywood cheeseburger approach is you have a character who has a goal and they have obstacles and they have a deadline in order to achieve this goal, and that's what creates the urgency. But when you have a vengeance story, a payback story, there's something that I've been calling the payback clock, which is the bad thing has already happened. So there is ever-present urgency from the character, which makes the audience feel ever-present urgency to get payback, and that is what's creating urgency from scene to scene, this payback clock, right? This vengeance clock. And I thought it was interesting that once again, with this genre, even for all their subversion of it, there's definitely the payback clock, right? Like it's what's driving him. It's what's creating the urgency from scene to scene. All right, he's killing this one person. He's back on the road. He's off to get the next target who wronged his.
And
who beat up
as far
his
as they're
girlfriend.
concerned, it's kind of just happening at random almost.
Right.
There's
To them,
there's
it's
nothing
random.
ticking, right?
Right. But to him, the clock is ticking like ever presently. I have to get my payback, So it's interesting that you don't necessarily ever really need a deadline when you're telling a story like this. There is urgency kind of built into the premise itself and the subgenre itself. So that's quick and easy. And if you like that and you want to learn more about that, we talk about that on the Pig episode. When somebody is kidnapped, that's the payback clock. It sort of has the same idea.
As soon as possible, right?
But right. John Wick, like the bad thing has already happened in Pig. His pig got stolen. So every second is another second where the pig might be dead. So
Do you think, because this movie is a little vague on this kind of thing, do you think this movie is purely a vengeance thing, or do you think he's trying to battle for survival in some ways because, now he's hunted? Or do you think he doesn't really care about that because he's kind of like, it's not.
Go ahead, Bob.
No, they show up at his home to hurt him, and they end up hurting his wife. So I think it's both. He knows he's being hunted because he messed up, and he probably killed somebody in that opening that he wasn't supposed to. Right? We're not given the specifics, and they hurt his wife. So it's both. He's if he doesn't kill these people, eventually he's going down, and also he's mad. They hurt the only thing he loves, in the world. So
yeah,
it's both, right?
I put this down on the. I agree. I put this down later on the Terminator discussion. But I think there's a desire also from our sake that he then sort of aligns with later. He's like institutionalized, just like John Wick, right? Like he's in a life of crime that he can't escape. And there's like
he's
this
the Frankenstein
desire,
monster of that life, right?
And there's this desire from the audience, and then he eventually aligns with us later through the events to get out, right? And so I think that's also what's driving the story forward, is this tension of, is he gonna figure out that he needs to get out of this life? Is he gonna find a way to escape this life of crime? But I do. You're right, Jamie. The survival aspect does create urgency too. Like they're gonna get me if I don't get them first. Dog eat dog, as he says. Kill or be killed. Yeah,
it does add more to that the clock.
To that clock. So that clock is there too. Yes.
This is a deeper discussion, and I'm not sure we get into this. I know we get into the final thing later on, but just to throw this out there, because I've been thinking a lot about this. The Tilda Swinton bear joke feels like the go to the classroom scene to me, somehow in this.
Remind
it is.
What that is.
So,
agreed.
Yeah. We don't have this in the talking points, right? So I just want to bring this up.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
So essentially she sits down and she tells this joke about how this hunter goes out and he tries to shoot the bear, I think, but he misses. So the bear sodomizes him, and then he goes back out and he does it again. And eventually the bear says, I don't think you're coming out here to kill me or for the hunting.
Right, yeah.
So it kind of implies, so to me, I'm like, what does that mean for our hero? Because that's what she's basically accusing him. Like, does he like the drama of it? He's not. Did he miss on purpose? Did
Right.
he? Is he trying to get it? I like it. It would almost make more sense to me. Like that would compute more to me if he kept doing this. Like if he had a history of screwing up or something, because it almost felt like he liked the drama more than he liked. That's the more one-to-one attachment to the bear story or something like that. So I'm trying to figure out like the bigger story of the bear and the bigger story of him. Maybe this will play into the final confrontation thing.
It
Yeah,
also could
we'll,
have
we'll
something coming from Tilda Swinton's character too.
Yeah.
It could be her misread.
Well,
also, right?
The interesting thing about her to me is she is him in some ways.
In some ways,
yeah.
He's looking at a mirror in her because he doesn't talk the whole movie, really. I mean, he says a
Right.
couple words.
10
Which
lines.
is on the next. It's on the next talking point.
10 lines according to Fincher.
So I feel like she is his confessional scene in a weird sort of way.
No, you're right. I
you're right.
agree.
Because they are the same. He could be on the other side.
That's what I'm saying is like if he lies to himself and she's his confessional, her lying to herself is also possible.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's some great quotes from Andrew Kevin Walker, Jamie, about this scene. So I'll just go ahead and mention them now. To your point.
Okay.
They said that they always referred to Tilda Swinton's character as the ghost of Christmas Future, which is great. I'm going to save that. I made me go like, I have an exercise, a Scrooge exercise. I'm saving it for our next Christmas
that is
episode.
great.
Yeah. So because she is a reflection. So they described that scene as two samurai facing off without fighting. And said that he can't, this is Andrew Kevin Walker, he can't resist talking to her. So like he chooses to have a conversation instead of killing her first, because she's the one and only person in the world who the killer could go up to and actually learn something about himself and his future. He wants to ask her, how do you get off this road? His mantra gets stepped on. She disarms him with the joke and gets in his head. And then she disarms him again with his rule about empathy when she says, when your time comes, it's not going to be your life that flashes before your eyes. It's going to be mine. So those are some great insight from the writer about that.
Yeah. And I still don't know what the bear story necessarily.
But I think that's what makes it kind of interesting.
No, I think that's what they're going for in this movie for sure. They're kind of leading you far enough, but then that's it, and let you decide kind of what these
interpretation.
Things yeah. I think that's kind of the gimmick of this.
It also
not
could
the gimmick, but that's
Jamie. It could play into like also she's saying like you like being this thing even though you don't love killing. You he almost likes the coolness of thinking how dark and cold and badass he is, but he's actually not totally like that. Like he actually just likes the sodomy of the bear. He doesn't like the killing the bear.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's up for interpretation, which I think is the quote of this movie. All right, you want to talk about the voiceover?
Yeah,
we've touched it, but
put a few things on there. First, I kind of want to just talk about Jamie, do you have experience? Have you been hired before to adapt source material? Has that been something you've experienced?
Yeah, I have. I have on a couple occasions I've been hired to adapt source material. It's funny. At first I was going to say no, I haven't, and then I thought of 4 different spots where
that's what I figured.
That's how long it's been. I've that's when you knew you've been writing too long. When it's like, oh yeah, and what first came to mind though, adapting source material to me is pitching for source material, because that's kind of the same thing. Like you're pitching your adaptation, right? They give you a comic book, they give you The Killer, for example, and they say, it's funny, I think this comic was actually recommended to me by a manager, like way back when. They were like, hey, this is the coolest comic out there, can you check it out? But anyway, they bring you in and they have you adapt the material, and sometimes the material adapts relatively easy, and sometimes it's like a 10 novel series or where it only works in a book, where it's stuff like lots of internal thoughts, from a book, which where voiceover would come into play possibly or something. Because a lot of books are so internal, and the internal is where the greatness lies in a lot of books. So you have to figure out, without this great thing that they did, taking its best strength out, how can I adapt its best strength into a film, which doesn't have internal thinking, unless you do something that usually is frowned upon, like heavy voiceover.
Right.
In this movie, I think the voiceover was the thing. I think it's like, how do we make a movie where we just hear the guy's thoughts the entire time? I think that's like the gimmick. That's the whole purpose of it. But yeah, I mean, that's my, so anyway, with adapting, you usually have to, it's funny. I use tools when I pitch adaptation. There are a lot of things you have to figure out. You have to figure out the theme. That's really important. It's like, because a lot of times what you'll hear people say when they adapt, they'll be like, we changed everything, but we kept the theme. And that's like one of the most important things, right? Is like, if you can figure out what, and a lot of times the theme isn't agreed upon by everyone. So you have to figure out what the theme is to you. And then you can at least have like a guiding true north. Like, yes, we changed all these characters. Yes, we changed the hero from this to that. But at the end of the day, it's still about whatever it's about, whatever the deeper meaning is. And then on top of that, I always personally, I try to find like the Save the Cat, the 3-act structure in it. Like that's my next goal. I try to find the hero, goal, obstacle, stakes of it all. So when I adapt source material, they're the two things I'm trying to crack. I'm trying to crack the theme, and I'm trying to crack the hero, goal, obstacle, stakes. Because a lot of times novels or comic books or something like that, they don't necessarily have a clear path to either one of those things.
Cool. Yeah,
Cool.
I thought it would be a good chance to get you to talk about your own experience there. What this immediately made me think of is, number one, you said that the comic is heavy on the the voiceover narration balloons.
Yeah, it's all I remember from it, to be honest. Like, to this day, I remembered having a really, really good, like, running voiceover kind of POV, kind of like Brian Michael Bendis or somebody does in the comic book world. Like, they might do a Daredevil comic where it's like, I hang out in this roof all day and this is what I do, and it'll just keep going. There are a lot of comic books that do that. And they do it really well. And it's like where the writing really pops. It's almost like a writer showing off in a comic book is usually in the running
it's conducive
narrative
to the medium itself.
Exactly.
It
it gives the experience of that medium specifically. So that's
Yes.
that's really instructive, and why it works so well with the story. Because voiceover is kind of frowned upon unless you can make it organic and fit the piece. And immediately this made me think of like the choices you have to make when you're adapting, and whether it's fitting, whether a gimmick is fitting.
It's funny when we talk about comics and voiceover. Like, as a kid who grew up in the 70s, really the 80s is when I grew up, but I started to read comics in the late 70s. In the 80s, there was a ton of voiceover, and that's when comics started to get more adult. Like, when I think of Alan Moore doing Rorschach or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of almost like separate, like somebody wrote these panels and then he wrote this long philosophical poetry almost that would flow over. This comic, if I remember correctly, and again, it's been at least 15 years since I've read this comic. That's what I remember of it. I remember like these splashy images, not a huge amount of plot. Again, I probably only read the first book, and just this kind of ramble of philosophy, or something like that.
Wow. So it'd almost be like if they didn't choose the voiceover gimmick, then I call it a gimmick. Then it would be doing a disservice to the source material. You wouldn't fit the source material. Yeah.
As I remember it, somebody who just read it may remember it. Be like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. There's tons of dialogue in this.
What's the name of the dude in adaptation that hates voiceover?
Robert McGee.
Robert McGee.
Right. So like, So he can't complain about this movie because the source material is
And God help you if you use voiceover
Yeah,
narration.
right.
God help you.
But I'm saying since
he really sounds like that. By the way,
since this is adapting literally a
Yeah.
voiceover source material.
I kind of, when voiceover works, I tend to love it. Like
Yeah.
Me too.
I actually think it's great in this. I think it's great in Fight Club, and I think it's similar in Fight Club in some ways. It's like it's kind of this commentary on the world we're living in while it's talking about something else. But I tend to like it. Like American Beauty is another one that I kind of like the voiceover and stuff. When I like it, I like it.
I'm gonna bounce off that now to have two things I want to talk about. First of all, that I learned as to why the voiceover works. From the Andrew Kevin Walker interview, which you should all listen to if you want to learn more about the screenwriting of this, is the shooting script and the first assembly cut. There was a 20-minute setup that was wall-to-wall voiceover. Then the rest of the film, there was no voiceover except for the mantra being repeated every sequence to show how he's like, that's falling apart in front of him, in front of our eyes. But there was no voiceover after that opening. And then they watched the first cut and they were like, this doesn't work. It needs more voiceover because Fincher was like married to that 10 lines, Bob, that you talked about. He told Andrew Kevin Walker, like, there's only going to be 10 lines of dialogue, and if we're going to have voiceover, it's going to be at the beginning, and it's going to be quiet the rest of the movie, right? But then he watched it, and it didn't work. And so they kept, this is one thing I love, we talk about on this show, like the best, your favorite movie didn't start that way on the page. Like it got there through through rewrites, through post. We talked about there's like an hour of deleted scenes we went over in Gremlins. The movie is continuing to be rewritten as it's being edited. And Andrew Kevin Walker and Fincher continued to write voiceover for the movie all the way through the end of the editing process and just kept bringing Fassbender back in. So I think that speaks to, I have like kind of a litmus test that I use for my clients about whether a gimmick works or not. And I've talked about it on a couple episodes, and I kind of wanted to go through it and see if it tracks for this. I just have like 5 things that usually I've found script after script that uses gimmicks poorly, what it's missing and why it's not working. And that is, number 1, is it cohesive? As opposed to being like wholly unrelated. Like I've read endless scripts where the voiceover is just fucking random, like talking about nothing, right? Like you said, Jamie, like philosophical poetry, but completely unrelated or incohesive to what's happening. So this is like 100% related. It's literally telling you his inner monologue, right? About what we're seeing. So the second one is, does it emotionally enhance the rest of the story as opposed to like giving us no emotional insight whatsoever? And I think it definitely tells you how he's feeling about, like, he feels nothing. He says he feels nothing, right? Like, and he says we learn all of his like internal monologue.
If it doesn't tell you that, it tells you he's lying to himself about
right. He's lying to himself, which we can see. Yeah. So
Right.
I think it emotionally enhances. So that tracks. Is it consistent as opposed to being used at the beginning and never again, or just in the bookend? And they like checked that box in the end, right? Because like originally it wasn't supposed to be consistent. It was only supposed to be for the first 20 minutes. And then they put it together and they're like, oh shit, this would feel better if we added more, AKA if it was consistent. So I think for me, voiceover only works if you use it consistently, if you continue to use it. Like one piece of voiceover 20 minutes in and then never again, in my opinion.
That's weird, yeah.
Dude, I read that all the time. Like, I read that all the time. Usually when someone throws in a gimmick, like something non-linear, there'll be like a random scene that's out of time. And then it goes back, and it's like they have this one non-linear sequence, and then the rest of it's linear. Like, people usually don't understand that like a gimmick needs to be consistent, like breaking the fourth wall. If you have one moment in a script where somebody talks to the camera and never again, it falls apart. If they're talking to the camera every 10 minutes, it works, like Wayne's World.
Yeah. I agree. I see that all the time where somebody like starts out with a voiceover and then maybe it shows up one more time.
Yep, that's it. And you're like,
It's
wait.
yeah. And
So
I guess there's a tradition of introing and ending with a
book
voiceover.
ending, yeah.
There's a book ending
sure.
thing. But if you like have one on the first 10 pages and then one on page 50 and that's it, it's really weird.
It falls apart. Like it doesn't work.
it's
If
just
it takes you out of the story, you're like, wait, what?
I see it all the time. Though.
I see it
that
all the time. So I would encourage you, just like David Fincher realized, like if you're gonna use voiceover, use voiceover. Either use it or lose it.
We haven't done Goodfellas, but like Goodfellas has not only consistent voiceover, but more than one character.
Another one I love.
Yeah, right.
That's great. We're gonna get there. Then the next one is, does it tell its own story? And I do feel like this kind of tells a story of a guy who's like, his mantra is falling apart, right? Like all of that. And by the end, the things he's saying in the end are completely different. And we're going to get there too, than what he's saying in the beginning. So I do think the voiceover tells its own story. And then the last one, I don't know the theme of this. So I don't know. Is it thematic? And that's my last usually box that I try to check, to your point of figuring out how you're going to adapt the material, Jamie. But I don't know if this is thematic because I don't know what the theme of this is.
Yeah. I think it is. It's hard to know. I'd have to piece it together, but I think if we found the theme, we'd find it through the voiceover.
Probably. Yeah.
Yeah. Without the voiceover, the theme, I wouldn't.
You wouldn't even be able to answer. Right. So again, I just have those
answers. I think it works.
I just have those couple things. That is it cohesive? Is it emotionally enhancing? Is it consistent? Does it tell its own story? Is it thematic?
You reminded me of something when you said that they put the voiceover in after the fact. Yeah. You reminded me of a tweet I saw, and I was trying to find it while you were talking, but it basically said this has nothing to do with the script process.
That's okay.
This blows my mind. This is the thing that blows my mind. They sent the movie over to Steven Soderbergh, and his way of reviewing it is to re-edit the movie. And he was the one that told them they needed more voiceover. I don't know why I have that in my head. I saw a tweet about that. So he actually, if you send your movie to Steven Soderbergh, he will re-edit it to give you notes. Like that's what he does. And he was like, you need more voiceover. See this part? You need more voiceover. And I don't know. He did all kinds of things. And
Andrew Kevin Walker said he actually took the opening line, which we're also going to talk about when we talk about the before and after. This line, it's amazing how physically exhausting it can be to do nothing.
No, my screenwriting.
That line was 20 minutes in.
Oh,
and Soderbergh put it at the front with him sitting there. It was like, that's how this movie needs to begin. And they were like, oh shit, you're right. So even like it wasn't even on the page that way. I love those types.
It also tells you everything about the character.
Yeah,
a man who he like levity causes him pain. Not to quote Con Air, but
so it goes this like the writer even had it. He just needed to move it to an earlier place to kind of make it the most impactful. So
it's an editing choice.
Workshopping the material matters. Yeah, it's worth doing.
We need a friend like Steven Soderbergh.
Yeah, if only.
Yeah, no big deal. Who doesn't have one?
Yeah,
exactly. Maybe Topher Grace would.
Yeah. Talk about protagonist a few words.
So I just we've done. This is something that I've learned from doing the show and from doing episodes about vengeance stories. That vengeance stories, if you're doing like in the vengeance genre, they tend to come with a protagonist who doesn't talk, right? And if we're going to learn about them, we're going to learn from other people. So I just kind of wanted to talk about other examples and then how this movie kind of subverts it, which is like John Wick, the Dollars Trilogy, Man with No Name, The Bride and Kill Bill, Eric Draven and The Crow. Like if you're telling a vengeance story, again, usually those people are not going to say much because they're by themselves on a mission to get payback. But this one, it subverts it using the voiceover. He doesn't say more than 10 lines in the movie to other people, but he talks the whole fucking movie, right?
Right.
He basically becomes his own window character, which a window character is how you learn about your protagonist usually is through other characters talking to them and forcing them to say things about how they feel or hide feelings, and when in the absence of that, you have to find a way to get your character to talk about their feelings. A great example, not in the vengeance genre, is Wilson in Castaway, right? They were like, well, Tom Hanks's character is going to be on an island for an hour of the movie. How the fuck are we going to know how he's feeling? They created a character in the soccer ball that he talks to about his feelings and his goals and the stakes and all those things. So this was just a great example of how the voiceover was like served as our window into his character. So that's what I wanted to say about it.
Very cool. Do you guys want to talk about the sequence method?
Yeah, Jamie, you had this on here.
Yeah. So this movie's interesting as far as structure goes. I mean, I'm sure I could do, because it is so simple, some kind of save the cat structure, but I'm not really sure that it's weird in that I don't feel like this movie escalates the way a normal save the cat 3-act structure would. I feel like some of the emotional high points happen before the end. Like what would the all is lost be in this movie? You know what I mean? It's like I'd have a hard time pegging it. Is there a midpoint twist? I mean, yes and no. It's a difficult one. So for me, when I look at a movie like this, it feels more like it's not quite an anthology, but it almost is like a comic where you'd have different issues, right? So each of the kills kind of is its own separate little story.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way I got it. Like after you get outside of the beginning, each of the kills are its own story. And when I think of that, I think of the sequence method. And what the sequence method or the mini movie method is, it's this method of outlining, much like Save the Cat, that is super simple. And if you don't like Save the Cat, or you think it's hard to kind of wrap your head around what the debate is or what the fun and games is, I find the sequence method can be a great way to kind of get you around that and help you, if you're having trouble figuring out what your story is, but you don't want to jump all the way to Save the Cat or something like that. So what the sequence method is there's 8 sequences. They're usually relatively 15 minutes. Am I doing the math right? Something like that.
10 to 12.
10 to 12. They're usually a
Right.
little less than 15. Strangely enough, if you do Save the Cat, they fall in obvious places. Like the first one ends in a catalyst, the second one ends at a break into 2, the third one ends somewhere in the middle of Fun and Games, the fourth one ends at the midpoint, so on, so on. And they kind of land perfectly in cliffhanger moments that are the big beats of Save the Cat, the big single scene beats of Save the Cat. It's really, I mean, so I can't, at this point, I can't divorce, like if I try
Yeah,
to
I
divorce
know you are trying.
Right.
I
Yeah.
can't. I can't do it. But so the advantage of the sequence method, there's 8 sequences. If you think of them as 8 mini movies that you have to write. And in each of those movies, they're kind of little stories unto themselves that begin with some kind of setup of a goal or something like that. They try to achieve the goal. And by the end, there's some kind of cliffhanger or something that spins you to the next sequence. This is the way I talk about it. If you read the sequence method book, it's probably very different. But anyway, I think of them as 8 mini stories. Each one has its own cliffhanger. So in this movie, just to give you an example, the way I broke it down, and honestly, when I watched it, I was like, well, that's an unconventional structure. It doesn't really feel like perfect Save the Cat or anything like that. I said, it's probably sequence method. And then I went back and I just kind of quickly wrote up what I thought the sequence were. And guess what? It was 8 sequences. It just magically. And honestly, I didn't force it. I just kind of, I was like, it's probably only 6 because I think there's only 5 chapters in the movie.
Yeah.
Right.
I think 6 chapters, yeah.
6 chapters. So immediately I was thinking, oh, there's going to be 6 because it's 6.
Mhm.
But here's how I did it. You can, but by the way, like I always say with Save the Cat, sequence method, whatever, it's not the best thing to analyze a movie this way. It's really made to pull a movie out of you. So if you're like, that's not the right sequence, I don't, it doesn't matter to me. Fine, you win. This is more. This
It's
is
a
more.
bit arbitrary, right? Is what you're
Yeah,
saying.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm using this as an example to help
Brainstorming
you
techniques.
Yeah.
you brainstorm your own stories, but it doesn't work because, like, for all we know, this movie could add like another hour to it, and they cut it out,
cut
or
it,
something
right.
like that. So it doesn't always work for a feature film, but this one, strangely enough, kind of did.
I think
So
they said they used everything in that interview I sent you guys.
okay,
So it really is like everything they shot is almost there.
That's
okay,
awesome.
okay.
Yeah.
So the first one I had, the first sequence I had as him trying to kill the person, him trying to kill the target, and it ends with him missing the target. That was the first sequence. And this is why I don't divide them into chapters so much. I feel like there's two sequences
Yeah, that's
within
a
that one
whole
chapter.
that ends that sequence.
You're
I
right.
agree.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
Right.
Yeah. So then the second one I have is him escaping back to home, basically. So him trying to get back to the Dominican Republic, and he learns that his partner, wife, whatever she is, that she was tortured, injured, and the bad guys fled in a taxi.
Right.
So that's what I have as part 2. Okay. So then after that, here's what's interesting. He basically kills 6 people, I think. And there's 6 more sequences. Each one is a kill. So, and I bet you Kill Bill kind of flows in a similar weird manner.
Yep, probably.
So each kill is its own little story. This one is the only one I'm not sure about. The taxi driver is so small, the scene, that I'm not sure if that's its own sequence, but I'm giving it its own sequence because it's its own thing. Then he goes to Hodge's office, and I gave a sequence to killing, I think that's the guy's name, killing Hodges with the nail gun and all that stuff. But I end the sequence when he goes out with Dolores. Like, that's the end of the sequence. Dolores is the next sequence. I give that sequence 5. Sequence 6 is the Brute. Sequence 7 is the Expert, right?
Mhm.
And then sequence 8 is, I kind of lumped it all together. It's the epilogue and the scene with the billionaire. And then you have 8 little movies, 8 little short films, sort of. And that's how you could write a movie. You could just write 8 short films, and you're done.
That's like the first bit of screenwriting advice that Jimmy ever gave me, was the 8 movies thing.
That's how I write all my movies.
Yeah.
And they always are never, it's to your point about the taxi one, Jamie, they're never identically
perfect.
length. They always, you might have one that's 4 pages, but it tells a mini story within the big story, and it's all cohesively leading to that end.
What's funny about this one is I thought I was going to do this and it was going to be 6 or something. I was just going to say, well, that's how this one worked. But it actually, when I got into it, I was like, oh no, this is my instinct says these are the 8, and that they were the 8 I wrote.
And it's worth mentioning, like, this is for, like, I'm sure you can use it for anti-plot too, but this works very well for arc plot stories. Like Bob, you said that's one of the first things you learned from me, because I like movies where things happen. I am not a vibes movie writer. I don't write a 20-page script and then want it to be shot into a 100-page movie. I want to write where it's just nonstop things happening, no matter what genre it is. And one way to make that happen is to create mini movies where a lot of things have to happen within these, like, 10 pages in order for it to tell its own mini story.
I think, I've done a little bit of comic book writing myself, and if you do the old-fashioned comic book writing, which I've done a couple times, which is you have to write 5 or 6 issues and they get collected into a graphic novel, right? Each of those, for me, an old school comic book guy, I believe that each of those issues has to be a story sort of unto itself. It has to be kind of cathartic. I hate when I get an issue and it's like, it was all backstory, or, it was all fluff. Like, that to me is not good. Like, if I'm collecting a 5, and I think this does that. Like, it's very similar to this, where I'm like, okay, I need the hero to be doing something. I need a taste. Like, if it's a superhero story, I need a taste of superhero something. And then I need a cliffhanger that pushes us to the next episode.
Thing. Yep, and it definitely does.
And I feel like this form of writing also does that. It gives you a full little meal. It's like having 8 little meals.
Yep.
That make up a big meal.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes through everyone you would assume, like, you know what I mean? He doesn't say where he's going next. The text tells us that, but
Right.
it's like he's got to get the client, the boss, the person
Yeah.
the attacker. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
they leave it up to us to know exactly what the series is going to be of events.
Yeah.
Which I like. You know,
Yeah.
he's not like saying it in his head, like, and
Yeah.
now to get the brute.
Next, we're going
Right.
to Chicago.
Yeah, right. He's not saying it at all.
If you want to know more about that too, just Google it. There are like books out there on the sequence method, and the mini movie method is the other. They're kind of like the same thing, but two different people.
Way to
I
talk
think-
about it. One is Paul
Yeah.
Joseph Galino. He's got that book, Writing the Sequence Method, and it's got some great breakdowns. But again,
That's the
yeah.
one I picked up many years ago.
a great book.
And read.
Yeah.
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 And but you can also Google, like a lot of people have just it's not a deep concept.
No,
Like,
it's not deep concept.
No, I think it makes it relatable to writing
Yeah.
screenplays
Yeah.
and stuff.
The weird thing is there's a book written on it, but you really don't need a book. You need like a web page. That's all you need. And then the book like breaks down several movies by it, like
Yeah.
Toy Story or something.
Yeah, Toy Story is the first one. Yep, good memory.
But that's the advantage of the concept. This particular concept, in my opinion, is it really is as simple. Like I think what I just told you is enough to get you
Yeah.
started. Just come up
Yeah.
with eight
Yeah.
short films that make up a
Yeah.
movie, and you have a movie. Like,
Basically,
that's
the
kind of
only
it.
thing, the only prompt for me usually is a central story question that you answer by the end of the sequence in a negative or positive way. It's as simple.
Gotcha.
That's my only thing that I use personally. Yeah.
Okay, good. I'm a big stickler for what's the cliffhanger. What's the thing that
So you
throws
get
us
to
to
the
the
next-
next one?
That's
Yeah,
good. So
yeah.
put that at the end.
Yeah,
That's our good
that's
news,
fine.
bad news version of this.
Yeah,
Central story question that ends in a cliffhanger.
Yep. Yeah.
it's good. We touched on this Terminator as the hero. You talked earlier about
I
it.
put this on there because it was a talking point that Jamie brought up in the John Wick episode, and I kept remembering it while watching this. So I kind of wanted to.
This is
Jamie,
this is
tell
sort
me-
of David Fincher's John Wick, right?
Yeah.
in a weird way.
Jamie, you want to kind of explain that question, and then we'll just riff on that.
I honestly I don't remember. I don't remember it.
I'm always doing that to Jamie.
mean-
Jamie, you said this thing one time like 3 months ago. Tell me about it.
I mean, I can think that John Wick is the Terminator as the hero. I mean, here's where my mind goes, but you're gonna have to explain it to me. Is Terminator he's not the underdog. He's the guy that brings the action. He brings the danger. He's going to win most of the time. So in John Wick's case and the Terminator's case, those guys, it's almost hard to imagine, how they get beat or something. You just have to throw like huge odds against them. But I'm not sure that that's what we're referencing here.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. No, I just meant it sort of felt.
I think here he thinks he's the Terminator.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's not.
Because he gets the crap beat out of him by the brute. He's definitely the underdog, where John Wick and the Terminator would never be the underdog, I don't think, really. For numbers, they would, but not from one person. They would.
I guess I would just say, like, to me, there were times where it felt like I was watching, like, Michael Myers just, like, sit there and watch the victim and be like, okay,
I gotcha.
I get that.
I'm waiting for my moment to just off them. And like, why does that work? Why are we engaged and like?
I was engaged because it's the fraudulent nature of him. Like he thinks he's the predator.
Yeah,
but he's not really. He's like
that's a good way to
predator.
put it. Yeah,
like you said, he's sitting in his car outside of a house. Like, what are you doing? Like he's not that good.
So you're saying like the paradox of that? Like
I think he wants to be the Terminator.
Yeah.
And that's what makes the movie interesting under a microscope is he wants to be the Terminator and he's just not.
And as it reveals itself, you do kind of reveal how low rent he really is. Like a lawyer kind of got him into it. He's not James Bond, right? He's just kind of like, I can almost see the origin story of this where he's nothing special. He's just like,
which he says,
which he does say.
He's just a guy that probably learned.
That was probably the not lying to himself line, where he's just like, I'm nobody.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think he thinks he's way more dangerous and better than he is, or he wishes to be.
And that does make it interesting to watch for sure.
Yeah, I think it does. Yeah. I think that's if the online discourse about this movie had a flaw, I think that's what a lot of people don't pick up on.
That he's an unreliable narrator, basically.
That he's an unreliable narrator and that he's not that good. I think they're taking the movies. They're taking the movie as selling him as the best, and I think that's a
The
misread
whole point is
of
he's
it.
not.
He's not.
Yeah.
The movie is about him fucking up.
Yeah,
Like from day one, moment
That's
one,
where-
he fucks up.
That's where kind of the humor comes from it, because he's constantly going through this thing, and we're like kind of smiling
Like,
because
wait.
he's kind of
Which
He's
again,
doofus.
It's like
supports
Patrick
that
Bateman at the
it's
beginning,
David-
right? And then it turns into he
Like-
messes up instantly.
Like the one part I like, and it's really subtle, is when he puts the nail in the guy's lung, and he's like, "It'll take him exactly this amount of time to die," and then the guy just dies. And it's like, you know,
yeah,
and
all this supports that theory that David Fincher is writing a comedy.
Yeah.
No, I could see that going over a lot of people's head, like they just don't really understand. But to me, I think that was kind of like, oh, this guy doesn't know what he's talking. He's full of shit.
It'll take him
Basically.
7 minutes.
He just thought it was
to
some
die,
cool
and
shit
then
to
he
say
dies.
to
That's a
somebody.
really-
Yeah.
After you put nails in their chest, he thought it was cool to say that, and it didn't.
Right.
Yeah, it just killed him instantly. Right.
Forgot about that, Jamie.
Yeah.
If I had a hope for this episode specifically, it's that we might turn around somebody who really didn't like the movie by getting them to watch it again with those. Because like the second time through is when I picked up on the stuff I'm mostly saying here, more so. You know what I mean? Like the second watch was way better in my opinion.
Me too. Same for me.
It was just way better, you know. Because the first time I kind of was like, okay, Killer, he's going to be the coolest, he's going to be the most deadly, and I was like, wait, he's not though. Yeah. And Michael Fassbender looks like a guy who would be the Terminator.
Right, yeah.
He's got that, you know, heft about him, but he's not. It's like imagining Michael Fassbender being bad at something is hard. That's why it's good casting.
It's great casting.
Right?
Yeah.
So the mundane magic technique?
All right, so I've never, forgive me if I fumble, because I've never talked about this on the show.
Okay.
This is not new material to me, but new material to the show. And I'm going to be all over the place with some quotes I bring in. So we don't have genre expectations on the talking points, but this is all sort of circling around genre expectations. And that's where Jamie uses the classic example where if you're writing a Batman movie, you know, David Goyer, when he was hired, was like, okay, he made this list of all the things that people would want to see in a Batman movie. And the same goes for a hitman movie, a hired assassin movie, right? You're going to have your list of that, all of these genre expectations that the audience wants to see. But your job as a writer is to find your unique take on it and use that to subvert it. And to that point, I'll just use quotes directly from David Fincher and Andrew Kevin Walker about that process. David Fincher in the press kit, which I haven't seen, I just saw that this was how he used to sell it to the press. David Fincher said, "We thought it would be interesting if the cool assassin movie tropes were all taken away." So there you go, Bob. Exactly what you were just saying.
Right.
So that was the idea. That's the premise, right? And then Andrew Kevin Walker was just basically kind of talking about where their head was when they were thinking about this genre. And he said, when you're working with any genre, these are his words, not mine, the fun is in turning the audience's expectations on their head. So again, they're thinking about these things, right? Up front. He says, what's your unique take on the genre you're writing in? And how can you use that unique take to fulfill and subvert the audience's expectations of that genre? We thought grounding a very unreal profession for the audience, because no audience can
Relate to this.
Relate to this in a boring reality would be the way to make it fresh. Give the audience an intimate experience of the killer's process and the painfully slow modus operandi that would be required to do this type of work. We wanted it to be exquisitely monotonous, interestingly detailed without boring the audience, which is, you can feel that sort of like from fade in to fade out. And I think what I learned from this is, so I have this technique called mundane magic. And even though this isn't a magical world, to me, it tracks in. And what mundane magic is instead of taking something ordinary and using the premise to make it extraordinary, like the target practice in Ghostbusters Afterlife that we've seen forever, but what does target practice look like with a proton pack, right? That's taking something ordinary and making it extraordinary. When you have like a magical world or a fantastic world or a supernatural world, you can do the opposite. You can give us something that to us would be super magical, but to them is everyday and fucking boring, and it makes it fresh. And I'll give you an example. So my favorite example of mundane magic is the Beetlejuice waiting room in the Netherworld, where they, our main characters have just died and they go to the waiting room for the afterlife, and it's just like a bunch of dead people. Like one guy's holding his heart, there's another person with a shrunken head. Everybody in there is fucking like the most insanely crazy people characters we've ever seen on screen, and to them they're just like holding a ticket number, and it's mundane.
Yeah,
right?
it's a dentist waiting room,
right? So that's what I mean by mundane magic. You're taking a magical world and combining it with something that's very ordinary to the characters. And for them, this waiting room is boring, right? And I think this whole and another example is like the trash eating unicorns is my classic example of mundane magic. And Onward, instead of like rats, they like their garbage is eaten by like unicorns. The trash eating unicorns are the vermin of the Onward universe, and it's mundane to them. But to us, that's like insane magic. But to the people of that story world, it's very mundane and boring. And I think I need a new code for it. But this whole movie to me feels like mundane magic. They're taking this fantastical world that we as an audience can't relate to, stakeouts and going to a gym, and in like a minute and a half he goes to a gym, steals the guy's key card, gets himself a phony membership, gets into the target's locker and copies his key code all within like 2 minutes, and he does it and he's so bored by it. You know what I mean? Like he's so like, I'm gonna steal the maintenance guy's card. I'm going to break into this locker. It's all mundane magic, right? It's all boring. And that's what makes it a fresh experience that we've never seen. It's the anti John Wick, right? Like it's never exciting. It's never fun. Like, so I don't know. That's mundane. Maybe I need a new code for this.
You know what it reminds me of a lot of is premise paint.
It is premise paint. It's a different form of it. Yeah.
Premise paint, you're taking a little from the mundane, like Ghostbusters. You might be taking New York City plumbers, and then you're mixing it with paranormal experts, and you mix the two together, and it gives you a certain flavor of paranormal experts that's mixed together. It sounds a lot like what.
Yeah, it's bouncing off of that premise paint and like saying, okay, like if you have a world that is like completely foreign to an audience, how can you like take what they do every day that's interesting to us and make it boring to the character? And that leads to a fresh experience. I think that this whole movie feels like that. Right? That it just, I felt like it was worth bringing in to the conversation.
That's good. Good news, bad news. Do you want to give the technique and then I'll go through the scene?
Go ahead, Jamie.
Yeah.
Sure. So the good news, bad news technique is it's mainly for action. Like you usually hear it described for action, but really it could be for anything. But I think for action scenes, they move so fast that there's lots of good news and bad news. Whereas when I describe it, you'll see what I'm talking about. Whereas when dialogue, that's so slow that you usually don't have as many. It would almost be like this weird whiplash if you just kept doing good news, bad news in every line of dialogue. So what the good news, bad news technique is a lot of times when I read action screenplays, they just be written in this kind of boring, linear way. It's almost like somebody outlined, guy has to shoot his way out of the prison or something, or whatever it is. And he just goes, basically the script reads, he raises his gun, bang, he shoots one person, bang, he shoots another, bang, he shoots another, and he kicks the door open and he's gone, he's free, or something like that. And that's it. It's like, and yes, that's an action scene. And yes, you could write that with flowery words and cool action lines and stuff like that. But if you watch a movie, it's kind of boring to watch that. It's boring just to see something that you kind of happened, just 100% predictable, it's like watching a straight line as opposed to like back and forth with twists and turns. So the good news, bad news technique is the twists and turns. So it might be like, bang, he shoots someone, but the person falls in front of the door or something. Now he has to move the person out of the door, but the person weighs 500 pounds or something. I don't know. So he tries to move the person out of the door, and he gets him out of the way, and he grabs the door, and it's locked. So good news, he grabs the door. Bad news, it's locked. So then he, I don't know, retrieves the key from the dead guy's body. Good news. But he opens the door, and there's 50 guards outside. Bad news, something like that. I'm making this.
Good news, he has a bomb on him or something.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So this is the good news, bad news technique. Is for during an action scene, your hero should make progress, but then that progress should lead to bad news, and it should keep escalating and escalating and escalating. So even though your outline might say, man gets out of prison, shoots his way out of prison. This is the way to flesh it out. This is the way to execute. It's really an execution-based thing. And with that said, the fight scene from this movie, I think it has a lot of good news, bad news.
Yeah, it's the killer versus the brute. And the brute's played by Sala Baker. I actually follow him on Instagram. He was really proud of this movie. I think he's a stunt guy. Cool. So yeah, I tracked the good news and bad news. And I will say, I've done this in the past. We've done this for Indiana Jones, Solo, Willow. All those movies are way easier, in my opinion, to put into text form of the good news, bad news. With this, it's such minutia. I tried to not be so meticulous about it, but it does have it. It's just like harder to put into words because it's all so fast and so minute. It's not like Val Kilmer falls off the car. Wait, he didn't fall. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't have that kind of stuff in it. It's like two guys beating the shit out of each other in a room. So it's kind of a different track here, but I'm gonna do my best. So I apologize for if it gets a little wordy. It's like hard to describe everything. Okay, so this is the killer versus the brute. All right, good news. The brute's dog is sedated by the killer, and the brute is taking a shower. The killer has the element of surprise. Bad news. The brute jumps the killer unexpectedly and grabs his gun hand. The gun discharges, falls to the floor as the brute punches his head. Good news. The killer fights back with a punch and kick, lobbing the brute's body into a wall as the killer makes for the gun. Bad news. The brute smashes down on the killer, causing the gun to get kicked under the bed as the killer gets head punched again. Good news. The killer dodges further punches and moves out of the way. Bad news. The brute easily grabs him by the chest and throws his entire body into the closet door and smashes him down onto the floor and wails on his head again. Good news. The brute tries to find the gun, giving the killer a chance to collect himself, get up, and successfully dodge more blows. Bad news. The brute lands a crushing uppercut to his jaw, kicks him, then throws him into a giant TV while holding him by the neck. Good news. The killer smashes a glass cup onto the brute's face, temporarily giving the killer enough time to escape his grasp, run into another room, and close the door almost, because bad news, the brute bursts through the door. Good news, though, the killer starts to smash a glass bong on the brute's head in defense, cutting his face. Bad news, the brute is bleeding, but he stands up angry and charges at the killer, hitting him so hard his body flies across the hallway and smashes into the wall. Good news, the killer gets up and dodges all of the oncoming blows, then grabs a framed photo off the wall, smashes the brute's head, knocking him to the floor, and the killer lands a face punch. Bad news, the brute isn't going down. He grabs the killer's leg, and the two exchange blow after blow. Good news, the killer gets the brute in a headlock from behind. Bad news, the brute is considerably larger and easily lifts the killer off the ground and smashes him into a shelf, smashes him into a few walls, and then dives backwards, fully landing on the killer with all his force, clean knocking the air out of him. Good news, the brute is showing signs of slowing down. But bad news, the brute lifts and smashes the killer into a glass coffee table and starts once again pounding on him as they struggle. Good news, they are close to the fireplace. The killer grabs a fire poker. He starts beating the brute with the poker, eventually landing a blow where the barb sticks in the brute's shoulder like a fishhook.
Oh,
Bad news. The brute pulls out the poker and grabs a lamp and throws it at the killer, and then shoves an entire couch into the killer's body, pinning him against the wall. Good news. The killer hits the brute in the leg with the poker and manages to stand up and body barrel him into another wall. A lot of walls. Bad news. The brute lifts the killer up again and smashes him into the kitchen table, flipping the table over and covering the killer. The brute goes for his own personal stash gun. Good news. The killer hits the gun with the fire poker, grabs the brute's ankle, and makes him fall ass first onto a broken table leg that was pointing upward, piercing his hip, giving the killer time to hide behind the kitchen counter. Bad news. The brute still has the gun and starts firing sloppily through the counter. Good news. The hip injury finally gets to the brute and gives the killer time to look in the knife drawer so that he can hopefully pull out a weapon. Bad news. The only thing in the knife drawer is a cheese grater. And the brute gets up, bleeding heavily, and makes his way toward the killer. Good news. The killer throws the cheese grater across the room, distracts the brute enough to bolt into another room, close the door, and even close a second door into another inner room, which I believe is the bedroom. The brute is bleeding even worse. Also good news. Bad news. The brute is closing in on the door with his loaded gun. Good news. The killer shoots through the door, hitting the brute and knocking him to the floor. He comes to the door and executes the brute with a headshot. Bad news. The dog wakes up, hears the commotion, and runs in and tries to catch the killer. Good news. The killer successfully makes it out of the house and out of the front gate right before the dog can catch him and lights the entire house on fire.
man.
Whew, man,
Good job, Bob.
that's a mouthful of one. So yeah, it's a pretty dense scene, and it goes by quick as hell. So me describing it is excruciating versus watching it.
But it's a great example of that technique working and making a really exciting sequence.
To quote you, Jimmy, it totally tracks. Like when I watched the movie the first time, I wasn't doing in my head good news, bad news. But when I watched it for that reason, it totally does track. It's like back, forth. It's just happening so quick.
Yeah.
It doesn't register like that.
Super intentional.
But also with this fight, I think something Jamie said earlier too is that he is just so outmatched. Like and he's not a very good fighter.
Yeah.
Like this has to end with him shooting a guy in the head. He cannot beat this guy physically.
It's another kind of humorous moment because, like you said,
it is. He's totally in over his head,
outmatched. He doesn't have a great plan. He's just in there improvising, not anticipating.
He didn't even sedate the dog enough, right?
Yeah,
anticipate, don't improvise,
and it makes the whole scene kind of funny. It just makes, and then on top of that, it's filmed with somehow this. I don't know what it is. Like this is not screenwriting, but it's filmed with somehow this great weight or something. I don't know. He's like smashing through the doors and stuff like that. And just, but he's using like dolly shots. He's not doing like the typical Jason Bourne kind of stuff. He's doing all kinds of wild stuff. But anyway, I thought the fight scene was great.
There's a lot of surprise in Michael Fassbender's face when he's getting punched. He's like,
there's a lot of humor.
Is this happening? He's like, kind of like, I'm losing. How's this possible? I'm the Terminator.
Yeah.
Right.
How did I fuck this up so bad? Right. When he gets hit in the jaw, that uppercut to the jaw is absolutely brutal. But that's when his face is like, is this happening? Like, how could this be?
It's funny too, because what it uses his broken compass, his mantra. It almost works like a song, right? You know how songs like I don't really know anything about songwriting, but you know how songs kind of use the same lyrics like 3 times, but they mean different things. This movie does the same thing with the mantra. And the fight scene, it gets to the point where he's almost like using it to pep himself up. Like, you know what I mean? Like, don't anticipate. Anticipate, don't improvise.
As this guy is wailing on him.
Trust no one. He's like almost like
trying
to convince him. Stick to the plan. Stick to the plan. He's like kind of desperate. So
he's like basically fighting the Rock, layers. And he's like, you know what I mean? This guy is huge. Yeah, no, it's a really good fight scene in both writing and technique and execution. Okay, you want to talk about the final confrontation?
Yeah, I kind of just put a bunch of questions on here that I don't know the answer to that I thought would be fun to ask. Like, Why do you think the killer chooses not to kill? And what does that speak to, like, the character, whether there's an arc, whether he thinks there's an arc and we know the truth, or all of that? Yeah.
There's that quote in the movie where he says, "Of those who like to put their faith in the inherent goodness of mankind, I have to ask, based on what exactly?" And that's at the beginning of the movie or
Yeah.
the middle.
Yeah.
And that rung to me the second watch when he didn't kill Arliss Howard at the end. So I was like, is that his arc, that he thinks that this guy isn't actually responsible, or he just decides he doesn't want to kill anyone anymore?
Right. Right.
I don't know. I don't have an answer. It's just that quote
Yeah.
versus what happens at the end. I'm like, it feels like there's connective tissue.
Mhm.
Like he somehow is like, he found some sort of faith in how much he's messed up.
Right. It's the only person we see him choose not to kill.
Not to kill.
Yeah.
Either that or he
So-
thinks he'll get more jobs from this guy. It's just it's a work decision.
Yeah, I mean, on the flip side of the work decision, it could be like, this guy's so powerful, if he kills him, it'll make things messy or something. Or
Then
I
he's
don't
got
know.
more people coming after him.
Yeah, there could be that. Like, better to almost negotiate his way out of it with the guy. But not that that's really said or anything, but that's just something, you know. But yeah, I don't know. I don't. It's and there's also part of it like this. You know, if the premise is the guy is just this goofy guy who thinks he's the greatest. Maybe he thinks there's some power in leaving the guy alive. Like it's his,
Mhm.
you know, I'm the guy with all the answers, and I am blessing you with letting you live and walking off, and I'm cool. You know, that's because even in the end when he's on the beach or whatever and he's staring out, he's like giving us like life advice or something. Like,
Well, yeah. So there's a
you know.
before and after snapshot that I kind of wanted to talk about, which is two things. Which is in the before, Jamie. I don't know if it makes sense to talk about the opening and closing beat on the Save the Cat beat sheet first or after.
Probably.
When does that? You want to mention
We can mention that super quick. So on the 15 beats of the Save the Cat beat sheet, there's a opening and closing image beats. And they usually rhyme or they're mirror reflections of each other or something. Usually the opening sets up the world before the character arc, before something changes, you know, at the start of the story that needs to be changed in some thematic way. Sometimes it's a literal way, but sometimes it's just thematic. Like, you know, Jaws kills a girl in the ocean or something. It's not even thematic. It's just visceral, you know.
Mhm.
But then in the end of Jaws, it's the same ocean swimming, but it's two guys laughing as the sun comes up and they swim back to the beach. Of course, after another guy dies, and
Yeah, right.
it's always kind of a weird scene where it's like, ha ha ha, hey, let's go swimming. Quint's dead. Yeah. But anyway, but still there's like optimism at the end. So it starts out with this dark dread and then it closes with optimism. And if you watch most movies, it's almost shocking. And I don't even think it's a Save the Cat thing. I just think it's human nature to have these bookends of sorts.
Mhm.
And the advantage of Save the Cat, if you're starting your story, it can be fun to think these up at the very beginning.
Mhm.
And then the rest of your work is really making a bridge to earn the closing image. Like, how do I earn that closing image? Like, how do I make that happen? So anyway, with that said,
Yeah.
the killer has a before and after snapshot.
Yeah, so there's two things. First of all, what I like, Jamie, how you've said in the past that the opening image and the closing image doesn't have to be literal, and it can really be like our opening sort of like glimpse into this world or this character, and then our closing, you know, snapshot of this world or this character, and contrasting those two.
Sometimes you see it's almost the same image, but they mean two different things.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
You know,
Yes.
it's like the
I
same
don't
thing.
think that's
but
the
now
way
it's
it is
different.
here, though, right?
No, but this one
Right.
has a very stark one. So, like, when we talk about character, when we're trying to deconstruct and we're having a hard time, often of figuring out whether the character does arc, often a really simple way to go is the before character and the after snapshot character, and are they choosing to do something that they wouldn't do? Those deal breakers, that mantra, are they doing things in the after that when we met them they would never do them before? So I just kind of wanted to like go over. So when we meet him, he is alone in a shitty room, cold, dark, and he literally says,
and at work.
And he says, like, isn't it amazing? What is that line? I gotta find it.
I got it. It's amazing how physically exhausting it can be to do nothing.
To do nothing, right? So in the end, he's on a warm, sunny beach. He's with his girlfriend, so he's with another person, and he's content to literally do nothing. He's literally doing nothing, which Bob and I have talked about. I have a big problem with doing nothing. It's something I need to learn how to do. It's like, I can learn from that. He's just sitting on a beach and enjoying, which is the stark opposite. And then the other thing is, in the before snapshot, not the actual opening shot, but like within that, when we're learning his process and hearing all his everything, he says, from the beginning of history, the few have always exploited the many. This is the cornerstone of civilization. The blood in the mortar that binds all bricks. Whatever it takes, make sure you're one of the few, not one of the many. And then the closing words are, fate is a placebo. The only life path is the one behind you. If in the brief time we're all given, you can't accept this, maybe you're not one of the few. Maybe you're just like me, one of the many. So when we meet him, he's saying he's one of the exploiters. And in the end, he's saying he's one of the people who will not exploit, people. So, I mean, that's definitely intentional. And I don't know what that says or how that relates to like the choice not to kill the guy. But anyway, it's there on purpose. It's Fincher. So he obviously wants us to listen to that. And yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. And to unravel that, it's like, I'm trying, something clicked when you said it when I was unraveling it. So at first he thinks he can control the universe, but later he realizes chaos rules. I mean, that's kind of what I got from that in some ways. So, because he says there is nothing like fate, later on. And maybe in the beginning he thinks I don't know, has a mission.
He says fate is a placebo.
Yeah. Now he doesn't specifically mention fate earlier on, like,
no, he
so
doesn't.
We don't know.
Yeah.
It's not clear if that's a lesson
he says karma, luck, justice, none of these things exist. He does say that in the beginning.
Okay.
So I guess fate is sort of the opposite of that, right? Like, yeah.
Do you think it has anything to do with what he says to Claiborne? When he says, like, I broke into your house and you have no idea why I'm here? Like, do you think like the fact that guy doesn't know about his whole quest, which he thought was monumentally important and was shaking the very pillars of the industry,
right?
And that you're like, you have no clue? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know, like his disappointment over like, you should be expecting me.
Yeah, it definitely makes him go like, maybe I'm not a badass.
Yeah, maybe no one cares,
Yeah,
I mean, he threatens him there, but he's also just like,
he does.
He's dumbfounded as to why this is not a big deal.
Yeah. Well, and then the other thing I wanted to bring into it is, Jamie, your core three, if it all comes down to it, there's at their basics the three types of character arcs, one which we always forget, but I remembered them this time, which is learns to believe in themselves, learns to work as a team, or learns to care more, right? And does he learn empathy? Does he learn that he already has empathy? Yeah, I don't know.
He learns that he's not a robot.
Does he choose not to kill that guy because he's like, why should I kill him? It would be a waste of, I don't know.
He just realized he liked the bear sodomy.
The bear sodomy, he just accepted he's part of the joke.
Right.
Well, I don't know.
If that's true though, when did that happen?
Right.
For us, like,
in the Tilda Swinton conversation, she says to him, when you die, your life will not flash before your eyes. Mine will. Which is, do you
like, think that like Tilda Swinton saved Claiborne's life basically by?
I don't know. I think
Yeah.
if there's a moment, it's there, right? Even though he
There, right.
kills her, he's sort of already in the motion of killing her. So it's sort of like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, there are moments where he breaks his rules, but
Yes.
I don't know that they're learning lessons or just
Yeah.
showing us, the audience, that he's full of it and he lies to himself. There's part of me that thinks he's just swapped one lie out for another. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
now he's just traded lies, and he's
Yep.
going to live happily ever after with this new lie, as opposed to his old lie, which he was living happily.
Which
with.
supports what Andrew Kevin Walker said, that he's an unreliable narrator even in the end.
Do you mean
Yeah.
Jamie? Do you mean like because I saved this guy's life, I'm now a saint?
Yeah, like
like
he's-
my
That's
wife
great.
can look like, yeah, we can live a happy life.
Which is
and I
also
have no
comedic.
guilt. Right.
in a weird sort of way, he's
I gotta watch this movie again knowing it's a comedy.
Right.
he's telling us his story, and in the end, he's telling us, and then I arced and lived happily ever after.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah,
But
which is very much like
he
Joker. That's
he
very
manufactured his own character arc.
Right.
yes.
He's a
And
good person.
That's good. And by the way,
because-
we're debating this because Andrew Kevin Walker said he and Fincher specifically don't want anyone
Right.
to actually, like, they're not putting it out there what the answer is, and they want people to go to a coffee shop. He literally said, we want people to go to a coffee shop after this and decide and discuss what happened in the end. So,
By the
that's
way,
what we're doing.
Right. That's exactly.
the danger of this is it's kind of like mini plot, where in lesser hands, people are just lazy and they say, well, that's what I want. I want people to debate it. And it's like,
and they don't have
really?
an answer, and there's no
Really?
way to find the answer. Yeah.
I definitely think this ending, though, if I've seen some reactions, it doesn't become a coffee conversation for some people.
It pisses
I think
people off.
I think it just angers them a lot. But then again, I don't think they're watching it as a comedy or as him as unreliable narrator.
If you kind of look at it, and everybody has a right to it, and says this isn't that deep, then you might be like, this is just ending with him getting away with it and being on the beach.
Being on the
you know?
beach.
Yeah, well, if I may, like, I really think the casting is what feeds into these conversations. Like, if you had this exact movie directed by David Fincher, shot the same, edited the same, everything, but it starred Jack Black,
Right.
giving the same
Or
performance,
like Zach Galifianakis.
or Zach Galifianakis, or Bill Hader, or something like that,
Right.
I think people would inherently they would see what we're talking about. But because Michael Fassbender has none of that,
Yeah.
as part of his aura,
And he sells the shit out of what his character believes that's false, which is he's the greatest ever, right? He's the hitman.
There's nothing that you inherently think funny is about Michael Fassbender. He's attractive, he's calculating, he's an expert fucking actor. You know what I mean? There's nothing that screams this guy might not know what he's doing.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that has a lot to do with it. I mean, it's not script, but I think the casting is really at play with how people are reacting to it. You know, Zach Galifianakis in this movie would be incurable. I would love that. No, not a single change. Not a single change.
I was thinking the same thing, but Mr. Bean.
Yeah, Rowan Atkinson.
Yeah,
that'd be incredible, right?
Be awesome.
But I think that people would go with it. You know, like they would be like, okay, something's up. Why would you cast him?
Yeah.
John Lovitz as the,
I could almost see Steve Martin doing the
Martin Short even.
Martin Short, yep.
Yeah, get Martin Short in a David Fincher movie. I would love to hear Fincher talk about that. Like,
I know.
Like that, like casting him and what that means.
They've
for the
talked about
character
a lot,
audience.
but they don't talk about that. Yeah.
Well, the audience's knowledge of an actor too matters when you're casting, right? So I think that goes in play.
I mean, this is a guy who, you cast as Magneto or something, in his younger days or something. And it's like, okay.
He played a robot in the Alien franchise, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is what he's known for, and now you're making fun of it.
Mm-hmm.
And David Fincher, in the videos I sent you guys, he mentions the Alien movies a few times, or it's like, okay, there's something there. Like he knows he's known for playing this cold, calculating thing.
Mm-hmm.
Then we get this movie.
Yeah, when I was watching, I kept thinking this would easily be a movie Christian Bale could be in as well.
American Psycho, yeah.
And it would have the same effect because everyone would be like, "Why does he suck?
Yeah,
why did he leave that guy alive?" Christian Bale kills everybody, from what I understand.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's everything, guys.
Yeah, that's everything.
Do you have anything you want to plug or anything before we stop?
No.
Nothing here.
All right.
I will just say, yeah, if you got any questions about this episode or another episode, I almost forgot. Leave us an email at writersblockbusterspodcast@gmail.com. We got 4 in November, so it's exciting.
And we'll get back on answering them. We've had like
Yeah.
a schedule. We have a ton of scheduling problems and stuff. So
We haven't had time to address
haven't had time.
questions and give them
Yeah.
the time they deserve. Yeah.
but we will get back on that.
Yeah.
So send us your questions and find us on social media, on the devil's social media, such as X or Twitter, Jamie's favorite social media.
The last social network.
Right. Right.
His last
You should,
stand.
Jamie, as big of a fan of the social network as you are, you would think you'd like Facebook.
Well, I'm on Facebook. It's not really
Yeah.
conducive for the public. Kind
No,
of.
it isn't. No, it's not.
That's why.
It's not.
Facebook is the first and last one I've heard. But
Yeah.
liking the movie isn't quite the same. Like I like The Killer, but I don't like Assassins either. So,
It's true.
but I kind of like
True.
Assassins. No,
We didn't even talk about the fact that he uses sitcom names.
I love it. I love it.
And I think that, like, before we end, I just wanted to say I love the fact that this guy had like a childhood of watching television a lot.
Archie Bunker.
Like that's like this weird,
George
right? Like he
Jefferson.
watched a lot of television, and you wouldn't think that if you watch the movie without that happening, you know?
Yeah,
he
it's
would
like
have all these sitcom names.
basically he's using a Fletch move. Is what he's doing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like that's really odd for the guy he thinks he is.
Yeah.
It's also unsafe. I was like, don't call yourself Archie Bunker. That's
Yeah.
like a bad move.
giveaway.
But he probably thinks it's cool.
Right.
He thinks it's cool to be Archie Bunker, but it's like, no, people will recognize it's a fake.
They're gonna
name.
find you, dude.
Yeah, right. All right. Thank you everybody for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.
Hey, this is Bob Rose, and thank you for listening to Writers Blockbusters. If you'd like to financially support the show, please consider joining my Patreon. I've been producing the podcast for several years completely out of pocket, and I'd like to keep producing it ad-free and no longer at a loss. If you'd like to help, head on over to patreon.com/Bob Rose Sucks. That's right, Bob Rose Sucks. And if you want the one and only Jimmy George to help polish up that writing project you're kind of struggling with, head on over to scriptbutcher.com. As a listener, you already know he's the best there is, scriptbutcher.com. You can also support the show by simply sharing it or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We appreciate both. Thank you for listening, and see you next episode.